Good evening. I'd like to start without further ado. We've talked a lot about social media. A few aspects of all of this to clarify, reminding you that simply 3 billion people who are connected to social media. Some of the most well-known platforms. 700 million on Instagram. 255 million on Snapchat. If we're more specifically interested in the French market, we're going to have 36 million social media users. And while average time spent in front of a television is 2.56 hours, about half that much time is spent by French people on social media. We have talked about certain tools that didn't exist only 15 years ago, and yet if we look at the mobile media users in August, Facebook comes second, YouTube third, Twitter in sixth. Of course, social media have largely shifted the way we work and the way we look at sports events. A report in 2018 talked about the evolution of all of this. So to reassure those of you who work for TV channels in the room, TV remains the privileged media for watching sports events. But we see a huge increase in other internet, mobile, smartphone, and social media. A few other interesting things if you're looking at the population that are interested in football. Those who are fans of football on the new platforms, are we missing anything if we are looking at watching a football match with a smartphone in hand? It's a different kind of experience, that's the main thing. Very quickly, why does certain things work and other things don't? The only purpose of sports as an event, as a show, is to it's not just to share with social media. It is a human sharing event. How do sports personalities use the social media? The first, simplest, is the fascination, quantity fascination. Cristiano Ronaldo, 50 million Facebook fans in 2012. 2 years later, he had doubled. His sponsored advertising, 230 million euros. 100 million subscribers on Instagram. When we look at we've said not much. When you look at the content that he shares, it's hardly anything. It's banal, and you do not learn much about the personality of the player, and you learn a lot about the brands that he is promoting. For instance, Antoine Griezmann. In 2016, he was the Twitter Personality of the Year. The counter for Griezmann for Twitter is revealing. He is subscribed to 2 different accounts, that's all. What content does he produce? In collaboration with a communications agency. Moving on, looking at the current LeBron James. He is a Golden State player, and how do sports personalities use Twitter and express themselves on social media without the interviews on TV and all the rest of it? They can bypass these other things. It also says how. It also tells us how shared content, how the content shared by athletes, also can become content that is used by commentators in magazines. So you're going to have to stay here. Another fails is another point that of interaction between sports personalities and social media. There isn't really any topic to this. For example, if you look at fails on social media, sports personalities don't generate as much as politicians, for instance. This gives, this reinforces the stereotypes of the sports personality who can't really, who's not very eloquent, and it goes against what do we really expect from players in terms of being good examples? New practices, social innovations. There's a lot of them. The selfies are the first selfie during a direct match, broadcast football match. At first, it was selfies were banned. Then they were allowed for players on their own in the bedroom. There are other things. Future journalists. How are journalists going to start using shared contact in the social media? Using, for instance, content for when players are being shifted from one club to another. He comes back from Spain. He's no longer in Spain, so what does that mean? Pop culture. How television series are used and treated. There's an HBO series that regularly in the different episodes criticizes the way players, sports personalities use social media, tweets, and all the rest of it. What I'm going to try to put forward, and this is a university encounter, so it's an academic approach. The way that sports personalities use social media is being largely treated in the literally dealt with in some of the academic publications, and you can see that a lot of the work has evolved, no longer looking at what is simply descriptive and empirical. In the past, we used to pull together media, different content, and then increasingly there's a theoretical discourse. What does the athlete is the athlete trying to say? Why is he posing in such and such a photo, such and such a selfie? Is he looking for interactivity with fans, etc.? Colleagues in Rouen have been publishing work done by interviewing sports personalities. What's interesting in these interviews is these people clearly understand the use of social media, but they also express lack of time or lack of skills for using them. So we're going to talk more specifically about Twitter, because Twitter has become the social media of football, of direct sports events, social events. Just before the last World Cup, 2014, Twitter France put out its data. 2/3 of Twitter users in France, 40% tweet when there's a goal. And when we look at what happened throughout the world on Twitter in 2016, Euro 2016 is the fourth most tweeted event after Pokemon and something else. And it was the most France team games were one of the highest trending topics on Twitter. So we're going to talk about footballers who use Twitter. Forgive me, this new word I invented, foot-twito, football Twitter users. Twitter is halfway between his professional activity and his social life. He tries to break off from his status as a football player. Is it part of his professional activity, or is it part of? Is it precisely a border between his professional life and his personal life? I haven't analyzed a lot of different tweets, but I've carried out interviews with some of these professional football players who are fairly specific, as we can consider them as being experts, at least not acknowledged experts by media, by the community, Twitter community, and even by their own peers. For instance, Manu Imoru, who's here, he would like to be a community manager as a professional. Sometimes he says, when I see some community managers, I would do a lot better. Pierre Boubi, he uses Twitter a lot to see if he's managed to reach his fans. I don't know if a lot of you in the audience use Twitter in that way. Philippe Sade, he's a Brazilian player in Lorient in second division. He's many tweets per day. His sister is a journalist in Brazil, and she introduced him to Twitter, and he only follows like a handful of people, including his sister. Guingamp supporters, I don't know if there's any here in the room. Nicolas Benezi, 5 tweets a day, Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat. He follows less people. He follows his friends, and he interacts with his friends and his co-players, team members. Manu Imoru. Manu Imoru in Caen, who's playing in Belgium at the moment. He's on Twitter, he's on Instagram, he's on Snapchat, and we're going to see later how it's important. And Pierre Boubi, it's very interesting because, look at him, he posted a wonderful piece of play, and he said it's not as good, wasn't really worth a tweet, but it was pretty good nonetheless. He has political considerations. We are judged on the field. He is judged on the field, and he said that's why I tweet from the field. Philippe Sade talks about things like the O.J. Simpson trial in America. If you know these people, it's because they have a slightly off-kilter approach. This guy promotes Brittany. Then in August, he was slightly more. The advantage of Brittany is that you can take out the grilled cheese raclette machine in August. Joke about the weather and how cold it is in Brittany. Capacity of his players to link in with the current events in a slightly skewed way. Someone tries to hold him back here. He was going to leave the club, but on this photo, they both know that the one in the background is going to stay in Caen, and the one in the front is going to leave, and that wasn't what he's expected at the time. I don't know if anybody knows what all this means, the implications of this. Zinedine, don't do this, not today, not now. Players communicate a lot with each other, between themselves, because they're friends. Manu Imoru, who hits a goal, and Pierre Nicolas wants to talk to him. And it generates a discussion that they are now very keen on their Mario Kart records. It's very important in terms of sociability. So you see, the jokes can go quite a long way. Pierre Boubi, who is very happy to announce on Twitter that his future wife has said yes to his proposal. She thinks I'm a football player. My real activity is on Twitter, is the subtext to this, and someone else picks up on the joke.
So in terms of results, and I hope that I'm still within time, I wanted to just say a word about Felipe, who is rather in a class of his own, because he actually did communication studies, and he got on to Twitter through a recommendation from his sister, and he is continuing to train during his professional life with lifelong training, and his sister is a journalist, and this is perhaps what meant that he is involved in intelligence and curacy. He cleaned up all his Twitter account follows, and he says that Manu, writes so much that it's polluted, hard to find information, and so interaction isn't really his thing. And what's interesting is that he says that when he uses Twitter, it is as a footballer. He is very corporate. He often uses that term, and he says, "You see, I've got 11,000 followers, 8 or 9,000 are supporters, and they're very happy when I tweet on football. And when he tweets on a musician he likes, it doesn't have the same sort of vibe." He's become very cautious. He doesn't want fails or back buzzes, and he has very carefully thought out tweets. So he is basic. Felipe tweets rather in the same way as he plays, in other words, as a defensive player with a certain style. He says that the real merit of the other three is that they are 100% themselves. Being themselves, being yourself, is perhaps the challenge for Pierre Nicolas Manu's digital activity. Manu says, well, I want to be like on Facebook with my friends, and I started talking just as I was, and it's sincere. I'm never doing double talk. I do my best to be who I am, and that is often an expression that comes across him when he says Nicolas. It's the same, perhaps even more so, because he says, I'm not a footballer. On Twitter, I'm a tweeter that plays football. And on Twitter, I really don't see myself as a footballer. I am who I am. I'm myself. And what's worth noting is that Pierre Boubi, with that free kick, many of his fans are on Twitter who discovered that he was a footballer when he scored this goal. Before, they just thought it was somebody who made jokes on Twitter, in fact. And Pierre Boubi often says, I'm part of a community, and there are some people who have 80,000 followers. I knew when they just had 6,000 or 7,000. And he is concerned about the role that he has in the Twitter sphere. Pierre works on his content as a professional. He trains when he's playing football and trains on Twitter. He tests his jokes out on his girlfriend first. Sometimes he's disappointed when there haven't been many retweets. And this is something which he works on very hard. Nicolas has already been criticised for his use of social media in his job, which often happens from fans and sometimes even trainers. You should train rather than tweet. And this is something which is not Nico doesn't always understand. Nico being his usual name. He says, well, people have already said that I use social media, but this is a different world to the real world, and it's only virtual, and so he draws a clear distinction between real life and virtuality, and all those who has worked on that knows that it's not as simple as that. Manu, he was criticised, his coach criticised his poor performance, and he stopped tweeting for a year, so much so that he had to reopen his Twitter account. So, what Manu did was what many students here have done, no doubt. He found strategies to generate communities on the basis of content and situation. So he went on Snapchat, which he uses very frequently. On Snapchat, he just puts people he knows, those who I know, even people I know that I don't accept. This is all about trust, and on Snapchat, this is very private life. But his speciality is to do photos of his kids in rather funny situations. He likes making fun of his children, and it's quite funny. But he does not publish this content on Twitter. And Nico does the same thing on Snapchat. He says, if you're my friend on Snapchat, you are really my friend. Don't betray me. So a place where they can have room to breathe because they feel that they are not in the public eye as they are on Twitter. The last thing that I tried to analyse in these players was how they interact with women, because Twitter gives you the possibility of interacting with girls, apparently. So we need to distinguish social interaction and parasocial interaction, which is rather a more distant relationship of a star to a fan. Nico, for instance, says that he always answers to Manu and Piero, his teammates, because they are friends, and as to whether he should answer a fan, it doesn't depend on the content, it depends on the individual. If it's a guy that I don't know and who criticises me, I don't care. If it's someone that I know a little bit, I might answer. Pierre tries to answer if it's funny. If you have 20 followers and you're not an influencer, but there's something to joke about, then he will interact. And Pierre reads all his notifications, and he really does read his Twitter for 6 hours a day. And now I'm only doing 3 or 4 hours a day, so I'm quite reasonable, really. Well, you can see he spends time there. Manu, well, it depends on circumstances and the feeling when somebody interacts with him. He would click on the profile and go down through the tweets to see what sort of person this is. And if this person is deserving of an answer in his view, he will answer. And for Manu, when he arrived in Caen, at Caen, he converted, as it were, lots of digital relations into offline, real-life relations. And when he comes back to Caen from his exile in Belgium, he got back in touch with them and played the werewolf because he likes the vampire game. So, to conclude, since I'm out of time, more research needs to be done on these issues, but what is interesting is that basically these players are generally aware that they are their profession as footballers is changing, and they are revealing their personality, but not with any kind of marketing or commercial logic. They don't want to build a brand or do some sort of storytelling of their professional life. It's an assertion of their personality and even subverting football stereotypes. If you look at Manu Emerou, you will find no spelling mistakes, no grammatical errors. He wants to write properly and have a reputation and acknowledgement because of that. Pierre is the same. Look how footballers can be funny, interesting. Felipe is rather different. He is very, very smart in how he uses Twitter and in the media, which have make him an intellectual footballer. Felipe is an intellectual with a different image. To conclude on that, Felipe, Sad, Manu, and Moru and Pierre want to turn professional in media more generally after the end of their career on the field. Moru wants to work in digital, and Pierre Boris has already been talent spotted through his tweets. Now works with RTL, with the radio program. Is Twitter responsible for that? Well, I've already seen that personality, and when I played in Evian, I already knew how to express myself, and the media were already appreciative of my straight talk. But just a few lines of inquiry, which we haven't dealt with. How can a soccer player become a communicator for sponsors, partners? They are aware that these players are not perhaps Footballer of the Year material, but they do want to show that soccer players know how to express themselves, and top players, if you look at their market value of their digital activity, you can see that being active on social media is being a footballer for a certain category of player. And that's all from me.